The moment we are living through right now isn't just another fluctuation in the global system. It isn't simply the next dip in the economic cycle, the next downturn on a graph, or the next predictable contraction before the market recovers and everything returns to normal. Something deeper is unfolding. Something that doesn't fit the usual rhythm of boom bust boom again. There are moments in history when the system doesn't just hit bottom and bounce. There are rare inflection points where the old cycle doesn't reset, it breaks. And when a cycle breaks, the rules that held everything together stop working the way they used to. For decades, we've lived inside an implicit expectation that no matter how bad things get, eventually things go back to the old normal. But what if this time the old normal isn't coming back? We have concrete proof right now that not everything in the universe follows repeatable loops, predictable returns, or closed gravitational orbits. The third confirmed interstellar object ever detected, 3I, Atlas, just proved that reality itself is not built exclusively on repetition. It didn't come from our system. It won't remain in our system. It won't loop back. It will not orbit the Sunday. It's here once, then gone forever. Its path is not a cycle, it's a flyby. And our economy today is starting to resemble that same pattern. Not a circle, but a path that moves into an entirely new direction. People underestimate what it means when a structure stops cycling and starts transitioning. The old world was based on the assumption that cycles repeat, recessions come and go, inflation cools and rises, rates tighten and loosen, markets fall and recover. So people relax. They interpret pain as temporary. They assume reversion is guaranteed, but every few generations, the underlying architecture changes. A recession is a storm. But what we are entering now is not a storm, it's a climate shift. In a storm, you wait inside until the weather improves, and then you go back outside into the same world you left behind. But when the climate itself changes, the very conditions you live under never go back to what they were. You don't wait out a climate shift, you adapt to it. Right now, the signals aren't subtle anymore. Debt burdens have grown into structural weights. Inflation is not a spike, it's a floor rising beneath our feet. Technology isn't creating new versions of the same jobs, it's erasing entire layers of human labor. Geopolitical alignments aren't cycling between the same two poles, they're fracturing into new power clusters. And while most people still look at the next quarter, the next election, or the next CPI report, the real shift is happening at a deeper layer, the layer where assumptions themselves become obsolete. Think back to every major turning point in history, the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, the rise of the digital era. People living inside those transitions rarely recognized them until they were already underway. They mistook irreversible transformation for temporary disruption. They believed they were just waiting out turbulence when in reality, the new normal had already replaced the old one. Right now we have the same blindness spreading again. People believe the economy is in a rough patch. They think the problems are temporary symptoms, not structural signals. But what's coming next isn't another recession to survive, it's a world to navigate. And here's the part that really matters. Those who understand the shift early don't just avoid loss, they gain advantage. The moment you stop thinking about waiting for the old normal to return and start thinking in terms of positioning for the new system that's forming right now, your mindset shifts from fear to strategy. The goal isn't to panic. The goal is to perceive what others are late to see. So if you value clarity, grounded thinking, and positioning yourself ahead of the curve, stick with this breakdown. Understanding what's unfolding is not about fear, it's about preparation, leverage, and intelligence. If this resonates, and if you want to stay ahead, instead of reacting too late, keep listening to the end, because the people who understand the forces beneath the surface are the ones who end up shaping their own outcomes instead of being crushed by a system they never saw coming. Debt was once a tool, a lever, something you used to accelerate growth, not something that was the growth. But over the last 4 decades, debt stopped being supplemental and slowly became the foundation. And when the foundation is borrowed, everything above it becomes fragile. Most people don't realize how profound this shift was because it didn't happen through a single dramatic event. It happened drip by drip, year by year, generation by generation, until one morning we woke up and discovered that almost all the engines of prosperity depend on liabilities instead of productive output. Debt used to lubricate the system. Now it is the system. And when the system's core is debt, it carries a hidden cost, gravity. The heavier the debt becomes, the harder it is for an economy to lift off again. That's where we are now. We're not approaching strain, we're already inside it. Governments once borrowed to build infrastructure, expand industry, and strengthen strategic capacity. Today, a staggering portion of government borrowing is used just to service the interest on borrowing that already happened. That means less money for bridges, technology, innovation, health, education, national advantage, and more money for maintenance of past obligations. When a government must pay interest before it pays for tomorrow, it's not building the future anymore, it's trying to preserve the past. And that is what stagnation looks like at scale. Politicians avoid talking about this clearly because the truth is politically dangerous. The more the system leans on debt to sustain normal functioning, the less optionality there is when the next shock arrives. And there is always a next shock. Corporations followed a similar trajectory. Instead of borrowing to build factories, research labs, or products, many borrowed to engineer stock price optics, buybacks, dividends, artificial boosts to shareholder returns. In a low-interest rate world, that was considered smart capital optimization. But when interest rises, the cost of that borrowed illusion suddenly becomes real, and companies with weak real productivity get exposed instantly. The debt that helped them look profitable under one set of conditions becomes the weight that drags them under when conditions shift even slightly. Households weren't spared either. Cheap mortgages, cheap credit cards, cheap auto loans, they all created the illusion of affordability. But price is not capability. Price is the cost we tolerate, because we assume tomorrow will look like yesterday. Now nearly every major category of household expenditure is financed. Food, healthcare, education, daily life, increasingly supported by credit instead of earned surplus. And when inflation rises while interest rises, while wages stagnate, debt becomes not a convenience, but a trap. People don't realize it because they measure their life in monthly payments instead of total obligation. As long as I can make the payment, I'm okay. But when the cost of survival requires financing, the system has already broken. Retirees are the most exposed, not because they use more debt, but because they depend on returns from the system to survive. When savings get diluted by inflation and market volatility, and when income streams can't keep up with rising costs, retirement becomes a narrowing tunnel instead of a period of stability. The cruel irony is that the people who acted responsibly, saved diligently, lived within their means, now find themselves punished by structural forces they did not create. They are in the crossfire between inflation on one side and financial repression on the other. Their wealth doesn't disappear dramatically, it dissolves slowly, quietly, invisibly, month by month. So this is the pivotal insight, and it is incredibly important to internalize. Debt is not the problem. Debt is the signal. It is the indicator that the system has already crossed from cyclical turbulence into structural destabilization. And here is where things transform from concerning into historic. Debt strain doesn't just cause recessions. Debt strain forces systemic redesign. Eventually, the system must either inflate away obligations, default on obligations, or restructure obligations. Those are the only three exits. None of them lead to a return to the old normal. All of them produce a new reality. And this is where our transition begins. Debt created the weight. But inflation is the process that dissolves the floor beneath it. Because debt doesn't operate alone, it interacts with the rising cost of everything. Inflation is one of those forces that people talk about casually, like weather. Prices are going up, things are more expensive, it's getting harder to afford stuff, but those statements barely scratch the surface of what inflation actually does to the entire structure of everyday life. Inflation is not just an increase in prices, it is a reduction of purchasing power, meaning the same unit of money becomes capable of buying less with each passing year. And unlike debt, which gives you a clear statement, a clear number, a clear interest rate, inflation is invisible. You don't see inflation as a number, you feel inflation through the shrinking of your world. Inflation is the economic equivalent of a slow leak, a silent drain that erodes quality of life, so gradually that most people don't realize the magnitude of the damage until the damage is already irreversible. The cruel genius of inflation is that it masquerades as normal economic movement. It pretends to be a temporary surge. Politicians use the word transitory as a sedative, a linguistic painkiller to calm people while the erosion continues. Governments tell you inflation is under control because the rate of increase is slowing, but slowing inflation doesn't mean prices are coming back down. It just means they're rising more slowly. When food prices go up 40% in 3 years, and then they rise only 3% next year, politicians celebrate the slowdown. But regular people still pay 43% more than before. There is no rollback. There is no refund. There is no reversion. You don't get to go back to the old baseline. Inflation creates a ratchet, it clicks upward, and the click doesn't reverse. For retirees, inflation is catastrophic in a uniquely personal way because retirement doesn't adjust automatically to preserve purchasing power. Someone who saved $600,000, believing it would support them for 2 decades, suddenly discovers that the same savings might only support them for 12 or 14 years. Not because they spent recklessly, but because the economy changed around them. Their money stayed still while the cost of existence moved away from them. They feel it in everyday decisions, delaying dental care, choosing generics, minimizing travel, skipping basic maintenance, postponing health treatments. Inflation forces life compression, and it does so quietly, without headlines. What makes this even more complex and more dangerous is that the traditional tools used to fight inflation can actually magnify the very pressures they're meant to reduce. Cut interest rates to stimulate the economy, prices surge again, increase government spending to support households, inflation accelerates further. Restrict credit, businesses struggle, supply contracts, prices rise due to scarcity, raise rates, borrowing becomes more expensive, which punishes households and corporations who already depend on debt, and the cycle reinforces itself. Inflation is not a simple fire that you put out. It's a chemical reaction in the core of the system, and every intervention has second-order effects. But here is the subtle, massive shift that most media avoids. Global trade patterns, the thing that kept prices artificially low for decades, are breaking apart. For 30-40 years, globalization exported inflation away. Cheap labor abroad kept consumer goods cheap. Supply chains optimized costs into the ground. You could buy more while paying less. But now, those global supply chains are being rewired. Manufacturing is moving closer to home. Trade blocs are forming. Geopolitical alliances are shifting. Energy flows are being reorganized. And when systems restructure, inefficiency returns. Inefficiency means higher baseline costs. That means inflation stops being a wave and becomes a condition. This is not a spike. This is a new normal. This is why inflation feels different this time. People sense the shift even if they can't articulate it. They feel that life is heavier. They feel that affordability is evaporating. They feel that each year they work harder for less runway. They feel that the money they save no longer represents freedom but dwindling time. And here comes the next twist, the major force that amplifies the burn rate of inflation: technology. Technology doesn't arrive politely. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't replace labor slowly or evenly. It eliminates entire categories at once. And when inflation eats purchasing power and automation eats job opportunities, the old idea of hard work guarantees stability collapses completely. Which brings us directly to the next force. For decades, people assumed technology would evolve like it had in the past, gradually, in cycles, with each wave of innovation creating new industries, new jobs, and new ladders of opportunity. The mental model was always the same. Yes, machines would replace some tasks, but they would also create new ones, just like tractors replaced farm workers yet birthed factories. And factories birthed software, and software birthed digital services. The narrative was comforting. The narrative implied balance. But that narrative is dead. Today's technology, specifically automation and artificial intelligence, is not merely improving tools. It is replacing entire layers of human contribution. It is compressing value creation into code. It is dissolving labor. It is not a technology cycle, it is a capability event. People used to measure productivity by how many people could produce how much output. But now productivity is no longer tied to human capacity. One well-trained AI model can digest more legal research in 5 minutes than a human paralegal could in 3 days. One automated trading system can execute, optimize, hedge, and rebalance at speeds no team of analysts could compete with. One diagnostic AI can analyze more scans in a night than an entire wing of a hospital could interpret in a week. This isn't better tools. This is the elimination of bottlenecks. The very idea of a human being as the throughput gatekeeper is disappearing. And once the gatekeeper disappears, the labor market's logic collapses. People still think the threat of automation is something that primarily targets the young workforce people in their 20 seconds and 30 seconds. But the truth is far more widespread. Automation affects everyone because it affects the institutions people rely on. If you are retired, your pension, your mutual funds, your index holdings are all tied to companies whose margins, profits, and valuations are being redrawn by automation. Your wealth is tied to corporate survivability, and the companies that fail to automate are the first ones to lose pricing power, competitiveness, and investor confidence. So, even retirees who think, "I'm done with work, this doesn't affect me," are wrong. It absolutely affects them, just through a different door. For working adults, automation is rewriting the middle of the pyramid, not the bottom. The low-skill labor market already got squeezed over the last 20 years. What automation is devouring now are the mid-tier cognitive jobs, the analysis, the planning, the summarizing, the reviewing, the managing of information. These jobs were the safety zone. They were the jobs that could take someone from poverty into the middle class. Now those jobs are being algorithmically liquefied. The ladder that once helped millions climb upward is dissolving, and most have no idea it's happening in real time. Even the creative fields once considered immune are now being redefined. Copywriting, design, audio production, animation, video editing, AI is compressing these tasks faster than universities can train new specialists. Some people think creativity is sacred, untouchable, human only, but markets don't allocate value based on sacred. Markets allocate value based on cost versus performance. If a client can pay $30 for an AI-generated concept instead of $2,000 for a human-generated concept, the market will choose price performance, not sentiment. Every revolution in efficiency kills nostalgia. Markets do not care what was once special. They care what is cheaper, faster, and reproducible. And here is the most important part: automation is not cyclical. It does not revert. It does not slow down when the economy dips. It accelerates because of downturns. In recessions, companies automate faster to survive. In inflation, companies automate faster to preserve margins. In geopolitical stress, companies automate to reduce reliance on global labor. Every pressure in the system accelerates automation. There is no scenario where automation reverses. This is why the old belief that new jobs will appear in equal proportion is fantasy. New jobs may appear, yes, but not in the magnitude required to replace what is being erased. This is the collision point where inflation and automation converge, and it is devastating when the cost of living rises while the demand for human labor falls. That combination is historic. That combination is structural. That combination is what separates eras, not cycles. And if the internal mechanics of the economy are changing this violently, the external power map is shifting just as dramatically. For nearly a century, the global financial system functioned with a single gravitational anchor, the United States and its currency. The dollar wasn't just money, it was the bloodstream of global trade, the foundation of commodity pricing, the reference point for safe assets, the denominator for energy, and the default instrument for sovereign reserves. The world didn't just use dollars, the world depended on them. This gave the United States a kind of invisible leverage over the entire economic architecture. If you controlled the currency everyone needed, you controlled the tempo. But that gravitational dominance, that unchallenged center of mass, is no longer stable. We are now living through the largest reorganization of power since the end of World War II, but most people don't see it because the change isn't happening through armies and invasions. It's happening through supply chains, through trade blocs, through strategic partnerships, through energy corridors, through currency agreements, and through technology dependencies. Globalization once meant everyone integrates into the same system. Today, globalization means clusters of nations reorganizing into parallel systems. Instead of one world, we now have multiple worlds forming at once. The most visible symptom of this realignment is currency diversification. Major economies are building bilateral trade agreements that bypass the dollar entirely. Nations are experimenting with settlement in local currencies, with digital currencies, with commodity-pegged structures, with hybrid baskets. Financial alliances are emerging not to replace the dollar overnight, but to reduce reliance on it slowly, strategically, methodically. This isn't a revolt, it's a gradual repositioning. Instead of a shock, it's a slide. Why does this matter for the economic future? Because the stability of the last 50 years depended on a single coherent system, one supply chain, one capital flow model, one reserve standard. But a multipolar world means complexity. Complexity means inefficiency. Inefficiency means cost. Cost means inflation. And inflation, when embedded inside fractured trade networks, becomes persistent. Not temporary, not cyclical, structural. For decades, the United States exported inflation outward by manufacturing overseas and importing cheap goods back home. When the world's factory was external, Americans could consume more while paying less. Now, supply chains are being reshored. Production is moving closer to home. Nations are investing in resilience over efficiency. These moves are rational, they make sense strategically. But they make costs higher systematically, which means inflation is not a wave we wait out, it's a floor we must now live on. And here's the twist most analysts avoid. When the world fragments into smaller economic ecosystems, trust evaporates. Cross-border investment becomes more cautious. Sanctions become more frequent. Trade corridors get more political. And energy becomes weaponized. Energy is not just a commodity, it is economic oxygen. If energy becomes volatile, everything becomes volatile. This is why the next era isn't determined by which country wins. The next era is determined by which regions can coordinate. Coordination is the new superpower. The U.S. once didn't need coordination because it was the system. It was the default anchor. But now it is one pole among several, and every pole competes for alignment, not dominance. And the everyday person, the viewer watching this, might ask, okay, but what does any of that have to do with my life? The answer is everything. Because when the world shifts from a single centralized system into multiple competing systems, risk increases, reliability decreases, prices become unstable, investment horizons shrink, currency trust fractures, and all of that increases the weight on households, businesses, retirees, and savers. You pay the premium of geopolitical complexity every time you buy groceries, pay bills, fuel transportation, invest savings, or plan retirement. This is the moment where macro becomes personal. Because when global stability fractures, the burden isn't felt at the top first. It is felt at home first. Every generation is stepping into this transition from a different angle, with a different level of exposure, a different margin of safety, a different set of assumptions, but all under the same storm. The older generation built their lives under a paradigm where stability was earned, not gambled. You worked, you saved, you invested, you retired, and the system rewarded prudence. The idea that the ground itself could shift wasn't part of the cultural vocabulary. But today, retirees are discovering painfully that stability was not a law of nature, but a temporary configuration of conditions. The rules they trusted, the rules they spent decades living by, are evaporating in front of them. And that silent shock is one of the most emotionally destructive parts of this moment. Retirees planned with linear math, predictable interest, reasonable inflation, stable purchasing power. They expected to downshift, not defend. They expected to enjoy life, not fight against erosion. But now, the life they built is being quietly compressed. Medical costs climb faster than retirement income, insurance premiums spike, long-term care becomes unaffordable, and everyday spending starts to feel heavier. It's not that they lived irresponsibly. It's that the system changed without warning, and the tools they relied on didn't evolve with it. Retirement used to be a period of safety. Now it is a period of vulnerability, not because the individual is weaker, but because the environment is harsher. Working-age adults, the ones in their 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 50 seconds, face a different kind of shock. They are stuck in the crossfire between rising cost of living and collapsing opportunity pathways. They are raising kids in a world where stability is no longer a given, where homeownership feels impossibly distant, where career ladders dissolve mid-climb. They must maintain household stability while simultaneously relearning how to navigate a new economy that is rewriting job security in real time. They are responsible for more but supported by less. They are asked to be flexible but punished for missteps. They are the generation whose stress becomes chronic because they carry the responsibility of both sides, caring for aging parents and financing children's futures, all while the system deteriorates underneath them. Then we look at the youngest adults, the generation that grew up with devices, interfaces, instant access, and global networks, yet inherited the least structural advantage. College costs more than at any time in modern history. Housing affordability has decoupled completely from wages. Entry-level jobs require experience, seniority, specialization, and now compete with AI. Young people aren't lazy, they're navigating a new landscape in which old developmental milestones no longer exist at logical ages. Getting married, buying a home, having children, these are no longer life stages, they are luxury outcomes. And people blame the youth for being discouraged when discouragement is the rational response to a system that no longer rewards predictable investment of effort. Yet here's the core insight that ties all of this together. We are not experiencing three separate crises, we are experiencing one massive intergenerational adjustment. One generation faces erosion of savings, another faces erosion of opportunity. The youngest faces erosion of expectations. And the tragedy is that instead of working together, generations have been conditioned to blame each other. Retirees think young people lack discipline. Young people think older generations had it easier. Working adults think both sides don't understand pressure. But these are not three groups with different problems. These are three groups trapped inside the same systemic transformation, experiencing different symptoms of the same fracture. Because the old model, work, save, invest, secure retirement, only works in a stable environment, it collapses when the baseline shifts. And now the baseline is shifting, which means survival and, more importantly, quality of life won't be determined by age. It will be determined by adaptation. Those who recognize the shift early, those who stop waiting for the old world to return, will be the ones who reposition themselves into the next structure instead of being buried by it. But adaptation cannot happen only at the personal level. Individuals can adjust, yes, but individuals cannot build resilience alone. The biggest misunderstanding people have in times of structural change is this: they think survival comes from waiting. They think the right move is to hold on until things get back to normal. But when a system is transitioning, waiting is a trap. Waiting is exposure. Waiting is decay. The people who thrive in transitional eras are never the ones who simply endure and hope. They are the ones who adjust early. Adaptation is not a reaction, it is a strategy. And personal adaptation is not complicated, it is a shift in mindset from static assumptions to dynamic positioning. The first key principle of adaptation is this: the old idea of education in youth, execution in adulthood, leisure in retirement is gone. That model assumes a stable environment. But in a volatile environment, knowledge decays faster than time. Skills that were cutting edge 15 years ago are obsolete today. Skills that are relevant today may be automated in 3 years. This means that mindset, not age, is the true differentiator now. Someone in their 60 seconds who is willing to learn a new tool, a new platform, a new process can outperform a 5-year-old who assumes the world will adjust to them. Lifelong learning isn't a motivational poster concept anymore, it's survival architecture. But let's be clear, adaptation is not about going back to school or collecting new degrees. Formal education is too slow for this kind of change. Adaptation is about micro-competencies, learning enough to operate confidently in a world that is increasingly digital. Knowing how to use online banking, telemedicine, secure messaging, cloud services, password managers, digital identity tools, these aren't luxuries anymore. They are basic infrastructure for independence. People who refuse to learn new tools become dependent on others. Dependency is vulnerability. Adaptation is independence. The second pillar of personal adaptation is financial strategy, not in the sense of speculation or high-risk maneuvers, but in the sense of understanding that money in a high inflation era behaves differently. Cash loses value when inflation outruns yield. This means that holding large static balances in plain savings accounts is actually wealth destruction in slow motion. Adaptation means understanding the difference between assets that erode under inflation, assets that float with inflation, and assets that benefit from disruption. Real assets, productive assets, innovation assets, these historically outperform static currency during restructuring periods. That doesn't mean recklessness, it means awareness. It means playing offense in areas where the world is growing instead of standing still in areas where the world is shrinking. Third, adaptation requires prioritizing health as a financial strategy. This might sound unusual, but in a world where healthcare costs often rise faster than anything else, maintaining health is not just a lifestyle choice, it is wealth protection. A single preventable health crisis can erase decades of savings, meaning longevity is not simply about medical innovation, it is about proactive stewardship. Physical resilience is financial resilience. Fourth, adaptation means prioritizing flexibility over possession. The next world rewards mobility, mental mobility, financial mobility, informational mobility, social mobility. Those who cling hardest to the old model of stability will break before those who stay fluid. Renting can become smarter than owning in unstable markets. Temporary skill deployment can be smarter than fixed career paths. Selective minimalism can beat accumulation. The old economy rewarded roots. The new transition rewards agility. Fifth, adaptation is not solitary. People think survival is about individual optimization, but individuals fracture under sustained volatility. Those who thrive build networks. They exchange knowledge. They share resources. They create optionality through connection. Personal adaptation begins with personal decisions, yes, but it multiplies when done in social context. Those with strong networks navigate change with more confidence, not because they have more money, but because they have more information, more support, more perspective. All of this means something profound. Adaptation isn't about being perfect, it's about being aware. The world isn't demanding genius, the world is demanding responsiveness. Those who can update their strategies faster than the system deteriorates will not only survive, they will enter the next era with leverage. But as powerful as individual adaptation is, it still has a ceiling, because what protects people the most during historic transitions isn't the individual, it's the ecosystem they anchor to. In periods of systemic transition, when the large institutional structures weaken, the natural instinct is to look upward for protection, to expect governments, large corporations, or global entities to stabilize the crisis, restore normality, or absorb the impact on behalf of ordinary people. But history shows the opposite pattern. When the macro system is strained, the burden doesn't get absorbed upward, it gets transferred downward. The erosion of institutional reliability does not disappear, it relocates. And it relocates to the household and community level. The irony is profound. We built the modern world on centralization, central banks, central infrastructure, central production, central logistics, yet, when centralization fractures, the systems that save people are always local. This is why community resilience isn't a soft concept, it is a survival asset. When supply chains break, neighbors provide food before the state does. When institutions fail, local networks become the shock absorbers. When formal systems can't respond fast enough, informal systems take over. We saw a preview of this during the pandemic. When shelves went empty and supply lines snapped, people didn't wait for a global solution. Micro networks formed instantly. People shared food, traded goods, ran errands for the elderly, helped small businesses survive, redistributed resources through personal channels. Not because governments instructed them to, but because human networks self-organized in the absence of reliable top-down intervention. In hard times, the human network becomes the real infrastructure. Retirees actually have an enormous advantage here, something younger generations rarely acknowledge: time capital. Retirees have time to coordinate, to organize, to mentor, to oversee processes, to create continuity. They also carry memory, not nostalgia memory, but practical memory. They remember how to repair instead of replace. They remember how to be resourceful without an infinite economy of convenience. They remember how to do things in decentralized ways because they grew up before society became hyper-centralized. That is not sentiment, that is operational value. Working-age adults bring a different type of capital: income streams, leadership ability, professional networks, organizational discipline. They often underestimate how valuable their operational experience is outside formal corporate contexts. The same skills that manage teams, projects, finances, workflows can be applied to local networks with even more transformative results. Younger adults bring yet another type of capital: computational intuition. They understand interfaces instinctively. They can deploy new tools instantly. They can automate small workflows. They can manage digital friction. They can create communications hubs. They can execute tasks across platforms most older generations find intimidating. Their speed with digital tools is not trivial, it is a force multiplier. When these three forms of capital, time capital, operational capital, and digital capital, combine, communities become anti-fragile, not just stable, stronger under stress. Imagine small-scale tool libraries, cooperative garden networks, neighborhood repair hubs, intergenerational knowledge exchange circles, localized resource pools, second-layer safety nets created by actual people, not by centralized institutions. These are not fantasies. These are proven survival structures. These are what keep households protected when the system struggles to carry their weight. And there is a deeper psychological advantage. Community reduces fear. Fear is highest in isolation. Fear evaporates when a person knows they are not alone in the transition. And this matters more than people realize, because fear is the single greatest accelerant of social decay. Fear breaks cohesion. Cohesion prevents panic. Cohesion shapes rational adaptation. This is where the perspective shifts. Instead of thinking, "How do I survive this?" the mindset becomes, "How do we together shape a functional environment regardless of what the top-level system does?" That is the difference between reactive survival and proactive positioning. Community isn't a sentimental fallback, it's a tactical advantage. But even community strength, to become durable, must be tied to the next element, the one most people ignore because they think crisis means decline. Crisis is often the birthplace of breakthrough. One of the most important truths people overlook in moments like this is that disruption and innovation are not opposite forces, they are sequential forces. Every major leap forward in human development happened during, or immediately after, structural instability. We romanticize the past as if breakthroughs happened during calm and order, but history tells a different story. The breakthroughs that changed humanity didn't emerge in times of comfort. They emerged in times of necessity. Turbulence is not the enemy of progress, it is the catalyst of it. Think of the 1,930 seconds and 1,940 seconds, depression, war, upheaval. Yet out of that period came jet engines, radar, nuclear energy, antibiotics, the early foundations of computing, mass industrial scaling. Then look at the 1,970 seconds, inflation, energy crises, economic stagnation. Out of that came the personal computer revolution, the microprocessor, the beginnings of the internet. Disruption compresses timelines. Disruption forces creativity. Disruption exposes inefficiencies, and humans respond to inefficiency with invention. And here we are again, but this time with an even more powerful tool at our disposal: exponential technology. Artificial intelligence is not a linear tool. Automation is not a linear tool. Quantum research is not linear. Biotech, gene editing, energy storage advances, fusion experimentation, these are not incremental improvements. These are paradigm pivots. They do not improve the old structure, they birth entirely new structures. Clean energy technology is a perfect example. We are entering a stage where new forms of energy generation and storage could dramatically reduce dependency on volatile global suppliers. If clean energy scales fast, energy becomes cheaper, more distributed, more resilient. And if energy becomes cheap and distributed supply chains can reorganize around local resilience instead of fragile global dependency, that would be a transformation as structurally important as the invention of electricity itself. Biotech is another frontier. The ability to personalize medicine, not just treat sickness, could extend not just lifespan, but health span. A world where people remain functional, cognitively sharp, physically capable into their 80 seconds and 90 seconds is not science fiction anymore. That alone would drastically rewrite retirement models, workforce assumptions, productivity curves, and the economics of healthcare. Materials science is shifting too. We now have synthetic composites, nanomaterials, advanced manufacturing, 3D printed structures that can be more affordable, more sustainable, and more efficient than traditional industrial fabrication. Imagine building homes quickly, cheaply, locally, without relying on fragile supply chains. That is not a utopian dream, that is a near-term possibility already under development. Innovation is not the side story of disruption, it is the other half of the equation. Disruption breaks old models. Innovation builds new ones. But here comes the key point. Innovation is not evenly distributed. Innovations do not save everyone equally. Those who understand the shift early, who study where momentum is forming, who prepare mentally, financially, strategically, are the ones who convert transition into opportunity. Some people will see the next decade as collapse. Others will see it as the decade where the gates opened. Most people will react emotionally. A small minority will observe strategically. Those who treat innovation as a speculative curiosity will miss the window. Those who treat innovation as a positioning tool will capture upside while everyone else fights for stability. Innovation is not just an economic driver, it is a psychological anchor. It reminds us that humanity always solves forward. Every generation believes that disruption is a sign of ending, but repeatedly, disruption has been the sign of beginning. Those who keep their minds open instead of nostalgic are the ones who enter from the new doorway. Because this is the ultimate truth. Decline is never universal. Some fall, some rise. And that leads to the most crucial mental shift of all, the reinterpretation of what the future actually means. The next section ties all of this together, because how we think about this moment determines how we respond to it and whether we freeze or move. One of the most important truths people overlook in moments like this is that disruption and innovation are not opposite forces, they are sequential forces. Every major leap forward in human development happened during, or immediately after, structural instability. We romanticize the past as if breakthroughs happened during calm and order, but history tells a different story. The breakthroughs that changed humanity didn't emerge in times of comfort. They emerged in times of necessity. Turbulence is not the enemy of progress, it is the catalyst of it. Think of the 1,930 seconds and 1,940 seconds, depression, war, upheaval. Yet out of that period came jet engines, radar, nuclear energy, antibiotics, the early foundations of computing, mass industrial scaling. Then look at the 1,970 seconds inflation, energy crises, economic stagnation. Out of that came the personal computer revolution, the microprocessor, the beginnings of the internet. Disruption compresses timelines. Disruption forces creativity. Disruption exposes inefficiencies, and humans respond to inefficiency with invention. And here we are again, but this time with an even more powerful tool at our disposal: exponential technology. Artificial intelligence is not a linear tool. Automation is not a linear tool. Quantum research is not linear. Biotech, gene editing, energy storage advances, fusion experimentation, these are not incremental improvements. These are paradigm pivots. They do not improve the old structure, they birth entirely new structures. Clean energy technology is a perfect example. We are entering a stage where new forms of energy generation and storage could dramatically reduce dependency on volatile global suppliers. If clean energy scales, fast energy becomes cheaper, more distributed, more resilient. And if energy becomes cheap and distributed, supply chains can reorganize around local resilience instead of fragile global dependency. That would be a transformation as structurally important as the invention of electricity itself. Biotech is another frontier. The ability to personalize medicine, not just treat sickness, could extend not just lifespan but health span. A world where people remain functional, cognitively sharp, physically capable into their 80 seconds and 90 seconds, is not science fiction anymore. That alone would drastically rewrite retirement models, workforce assumptions, productivity curves, and the economics of healthcare. Materials science is shifting too. We now have synthetic composites, nanomaterials, advanced manufacturing, 3D printed structures that can be more affordable, more sustainable, and more efficient than traditional industrial fabrication. Imagine building homes quickly, cheaply, locally without relying on fragile supply chains. That is not a utopian dream, that is a near-term possibility already under development. Innovation is not the side story of disruption, it is the other half of the equation. Disruption breaks old models. Innovation builds new ones. But here comes the key point. Innovation is not evenly distributed. Innovations do not save everyone equally. Those who understand the shift early, who study where momentum is forming, who prepare mentally, financially, strategically, are the ones who convert transition into opportunity. Some people will see the next decade as collapse. Others will see it as the decade where the gates opened. Most people will react emotionally. A small minority will observe strategically. Those who treat innovation as a speculative curiosity will miss the window. Those who treat innovation as a positioning tool will capture upside while everyone else fights for stability. Innovation is not just an economic driver, it is a psychological anchor. It reminds us that humanity always solves forward. Every generation believes that disruption is a sign of ending, but repeatedly, disruption has been the sign of beginning. Those who keep their minds open instead of nostalgic are the ones who enter from the new doorway. Because this is the ultimate truth. Decline is never universal. Some fall, some rise. And that leads to the most crucial mental shift of all, the reinterpretation of what the future actually means. The next section ties all of this together, because how we think about this moment determines how we respond to it and whether we freeze or move. The most underestimated variable in this entire transition is not debt, not inflation, not technology, not geopolitics, it's interpretation. Two people can live through the same event with the same external forces, with the same macro conditions, yet one collapses psychologically while the other restructures their entire life into advantage. The difference isn't circumstances, it's interpretation. In other words, mindset is the multiplier, and in times like this, mindset becomes more decisive than ever before. People who believe this moment is just a worse version of the past will behave reactively. They will cling to the old rules. They will wait for the old normal to return. They will defend assumptions instead of updating them. They will believe the world owes them stability, and that belief will blind them to opportunity. They will do nothing because they are waiting for something external to change first. They will collapse internally before the system collapses externally. But people who see this moment as a transition instead of a decline will orient themselves toward possibility. They will ask new questions instead of repeating old ones. They will not try to resurrect systems that are already structurally failing. They will try to understand the structure that is forming. They will not just survive the next era, they will position inside it. This is not naive optimism, this is strategic realism. The old stability was an anomaly, not a guarantee. Human history has always moved through transitions, and every transition changes the rules. Those who adapt their thinking first, adapt their behavior first. Those who adapt their behavior first, adapt their outcomes first. And suddenly, the person who looked vulnerable becomes the person who looks visionary. That's how the future works. It rewards perception, not nostalgia. And older generations have one of the most powerful advantages in this area if they choose to use it: memory. They have lived through more than one era. They have already experienced transitions. The economy in their youth is not the economy of today, meaning they already know from experience that systems can change drastically. They have proof in their own lives that normal is not fixed. If they choose to activate that memory as a strategic lens, they can navigate this transition better than anyone. They have the psychological history to recognize that this is not the first time old systems died, and it won't be the last. Younger people have a different advantage. They don't have as much nostalgia to let go of. They don't have decades of sunk assumptions. They can pivot faster if they are willing to detach from the idea that success must look like it did for previous generations. Their disadvantage is emotional, not structural. If they let frustration block curiosity, they become stuck. But if they stay curious and focus on positioning skills, they become dangerous in the best sense. Working adults, the middle band, carry the heaviest load. They are financing the present while trying to secure the future. But that also means they are standing at the strategic choke point of leverage. They have enough resources to reposition. They have enough experience to understand risk. And they are young enough to retool. If they break the illusion that normal is coming back, they become the most capable class of transition leaders. So here is the mindset pivot that separates decline from ascension. We are not passengers inside a failing system. We are founders of the system that is replacing it. When you see yourself as a victim of change, you wait. When you see yourself as a participant in change, you move. When you see yourself as a builder of what comes next, you accelerate. Fear creates paralysis. Clarity creates movement. Perspective creates power. And the future is not built by those who wait. It is built by those who interpret correctly and act early. That is the entire point of this video. Not to panic you. To prepare you. Not to tell you the world is ending. To show you the world is transforming and you still have agency inside that process. Because the real collapse is not economic. The real collapse is mental, when people lose the ability to imagine a version of the future they can influence. Keep that imagination alive and you remain powerful no matter how violently the system rearranges. Every generation reaches a moment where the world they grew up in no longer exists. Not because of war, not because of a singular catastrophe, but because the underlying architecture of reality changes quietly and then suddenly, visibly all at once. We are living through that moment right now. People think this is just another recession risk, another downturn, another correction, but recessions are part of cycles. This is not a cycle. This is an inflection point. Debt has become gravity. Inflation has become the floor beneath our feet. Automation is rewriting the value of human labor in real time. Geopolitics is fracturing into multiple competing economic ecosystems. Generational expectations are cracking under structural pressure. Innovation is accelerating faster than institutions can process. This is not the end of the world. This is the end of a world. And the beginning of another. The question now is not, how do we restore what was lost? The real question is, how do we prepare for what is replacing it? The people who will suffer most in this transition are the ones waiting for someone else to fix it, waiting for politicians to reverse structural forces, waiting for central banks to reinflate stability, waiting for companies to protect jobs that no longer exist, waiting for an old normal that is never coming back. Waiting is not a strategy. And this is the moment where perception separates the masses from the few. Some will panic because they believe their survival depends on somebody else returning the world to what it used to be. Some will disengage because the shift feels too complex to understand, so they numb themselves with distraction. But a small minority will choose something different. They will choose to interpret instead of react. They will choose to prepare instead of hope. They will choose to position instead of wait. They will be the ones who enter the next era as participants, not casualties. You do not need the entire blueprint to begin adjusting. You only need enough awareness to recognize that the blueprint is changing. Adaptation begins with awareness. Resilience begins with preparation. Opportunity begins with positioning. And here's the final truth. Humans have always survived transitions, but only those who understood the context early enough ended up thriving inside them. Every crisis in history created two classes of outcomes: those who lost everything because they tried to preserve the old model, and those who built new advantage because they aligned themselves with the new reality before the masses recognized it. The future is not determined by what the system becomes. The future is determined by how you respond to what the system becomes. This video was not just a warning, it was a decoding. It was a map, a lens, a recalibration. Because the danger is not that the future is unstable, the danger is that people cling to the wrong interpretation of it. Now the choice is in your hands. Do you freeze and hope the storm passes? Or do you move and learn how to navigate the new climate? If you want to keep going deeper, if you want to understand the forces behind this shift and how to position yourself, your household, and your investments intelligently, then do not stop here. What you've learned in this video is not an ending, it's the opening of a doorway. This new world will reward those who recognize the structural shift and prepare before everyone else. Click on the next video and keep going. The transition has already started. And the worst thing you can do in a new era is think with the assumptions of the old one.